Hello, Dorcia. How are you?
How are you guys?
Hi, Dorcia. Dorcia estudió en el Loyola College en Maryland, donde ella se enfocó en el concepto de cura personalis. Este enfoque tiene que ver con el cuidado de la persona, como que les preocupa, siempre está enfocada en el beneficio de la persona, su patrimonio, su libertad y bueno, los derechos elementales de la persona. Por esa razón, ella está enfocada en los asuntos de cada uno de sus clientes. Eso significa que comprende el impacto comercial de cada disposición que haga y cada acuerdo que esta persona cierre. Dorcia, a la vez de que hizo una pasantía en el Shiseido Americas Corporation y el Departamento de Comercio, estudió en la Facultad de Derecho. Desarrolló experiencias en transacciones comerciales internacionales y el reglamento de administración de exportaciones de sus pasantías. Después de la Escuela de Derecho fue a trabajar a las divisiones de United Technologies Corporation, donde se familiarizó con las operaciones de fabricación y tecnología. Dorcia asesoró a la empresa sobre las acciones correctivas requeridas por un acuerdo del consentimiento del Departamento de Justicia. También apoyó las funciones de ingeniería y adquisición mediante la redacción de asistencia técnica y acuerdos de licencia de fabricación. Actualmente Dorcia combina su experiencia en temas comerciales y habilidades legales para ayudar a las empresas a negociar transacciones de tecnología. Dorcia es del Bronx y actualmente vive en Connecticut, miembro de la Asociación de Abogados del Estado de Nueva York y del Consejo Empresarial de Westchester. Dorcia también es cabeza de hip hop yogi y golfista nueva. Por último, pero no menos importante, Dorcia es una ardiente partidaria de la Asociación Alzheimer y del movimiento Black Lives Matter. ¿Ok? Bueno, la charla lo que va a tratar es, de manera general, los aspectos de interés del TMEC, o que en Estados Unidos se lo ubica como el Usmca, en general y respecto de los negocios en Estados Unidos. La charla la vamos a sostener en idioma inglés y posteriormente será una duración de 45 minutos. Al final dejaremos unos 15 minutos para que nos puedan poner sus preguntas en el chat de la transmisión y ya con Dorcia las intentaremos ir resolviendo. Posteriormente, en estos días vamos a subir el video a nuestras redes sociales ya con la traducción en idioma español para que todos puedan consultarlo. Okay? Then, Dorcia, again, Eric and me, thank you for being in this talk and the information that you will be giving us related to the USMCA. Thank you very much.
Es un placer, and you're welcome. Thank you for allowing me to do this in English. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for asking me, and I am happy to be here.
Great.
I wish I were in Mexico, but I'm here in my home office.
Maybe someday. Someday. Okay. Well, let's start. I don't know, Dorcia, if you will be giving us an introduction of what is the USMCA agreement, as we know it in Mexico as TMEC.
Yes, so the United States, Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, it is the replacement for the North American Free Trade Agreement. It became effective on July 1st, so it is very new. And that doesn't mean that we're allowed to make mistakes, because the United States Customs and Border Protection, CBP, that's the enforcement agency, they will be enforcing the new rules under USMCA rather than under NAFTA. And so when we had NAFTA from 1994 until this year, and that was the free trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and now we just have the replacement. So there are lots of similarities, but there are some product-specific rules that changed the qualifications for preferential tariff treatment. And again, a free trade agreement is just that. It's an agreement between countries to provide preferential tariff treatment, meaning instead of having to pay duties when you export your product to another country, you can qualify depending on the product. You can qualify for preferential treatment or no duties. So it's free trade is supposed to bolster regional economies, in this case, the North American region, by making it easier for businesses to import and export their goods to a wider consumer base. So that's just an overall general idea of what the USMCA is and how it relates to NAFTA. It is NAFTA's predecessor, or no, it comes after NAFTA.
Okay, Dorcia. Then having that in mind, I would like you to just don't know if you can give us some key differences between the USMCA and the NAFTA or the TMEC.
Yes, so one of the biggest differences you'll hear about most in industry is the treatment of automobiles. So automobiles have a different regional value content requirement now under USMCA. It's a higher requirement for the regional value content, meaning more of the materials and parts have to be sourced or originate in the 3 member countries. That's one of the biggest differences. And then there's also a difference that relates to the labor in Mexico. So the auto workers in Mexico will eventually have to make at least $16 per hour for parts to continue to enjoy the preferential treatment. And there are other reporting requirements, and another big difference is that under NAFTA, there was a certificate of origin. That certificate of origin is no longer going to be used under USMCA. There is a new method of certifying origin, and any company that is trying to get the preferential treatment for its products will have to make sure that it follows the new method of certifying origin.
Okay.
No more using certificates of origin under NAFTA.
Okay, as I know, there is no longer a format in a specific, but just some requirements that you have to include in the certification of origin, right?
Right, so there's no prescribed format, but there are certain data pieces that need to be in the certification. So the product description, the contact details for the parties to the transaction, and the applicable origin criteria. So the origin criteria, of course, that's always going to be important when you're seeking preferential treatment. And although you cannot use the certificate of origin, those are some of the data elements that are going to be required in the free form.
Okay.
And then like NAFTA, note that this certification, it can be used for a single shipment, or if you're going to make multiple shipments, you can use the certification for multiple shipments, but the goods have to be identical, and it's just within a 12-month period.
Okay. Another question we have is, what are the requirements to use the USMCA? I don't know what are the requirements so that a person or a business person can make use of the USMCA? How it can get a benefit from it?
So the benefit of using the USMCA is that you can have a broader consumer base for your goods without having the additional tariffs to pay. So if you can qualify your goods based on the origin, meaning that they have to originate within the 3 member countries, then you can export those goods under preferential treatment. That's one of the benefits. And I just want to take a step back and think about the structure that you need in place to make sure you can leverage the USMCA properly. Because anytime you're using trade programs, you want to make sure that you have a compliance program in-house, and the compliance program will need to be updated now that we've moved away from NAFTA and we're using USMCA. So when I worked for UTC, I worked in the compliance program, and it's very important that you have the right people and processes in place when you're building or changing your compliance structure. And so the right people, meaning you don't necessarily want all of the knowledge of the USMCA and your company operations, how they're going to be related. You want that to be spread throughout the company, not just necessarily in your legal department, but the trade compliance and use of USMCA is going to touch your freight forwarders. If you are outsourcing that service, or if you are a freight forwarder, the USMCA applies. That's also going to apply to logistics, of course, your supply chain, verifying where parts are being sourced from. And even when those parts are being sourced from the US, Mexico, or Canada, understanding your supplier's supply chain as well, and how the USMCA might have an impact on what continues to receive preferential treatment or what does not, based on where it originates.
Okay. Now we are gonna focus on something very important you just mentioned, the compliance program. According to the new USMCA, and in your opinion, we would like to know how it looks, or what is the characteristics that a good program of compliance should have.
Absolutely. A good compliance program in general needs to be a comprehensive program. It really can't just be one document or just one process. It has to be comprehensive across the company, and it has to account for all of your business processes. So whether you are just manufacturing one item or manufacturing and distributing multiple items, your compliance program needs to account for all of your business processes, and it needs to be an embedded program. When I say embedded, you don't want a compliance program that no one within the company knows about or follows. So part of building a compliance program and maintaining it is communicating that the program exists and what the expectations are for people as far as escalating when they have questions and issues about the policies under the program. Having clear process for importing, record keeping, exporting, all of those transactions, you want to make sure you have a good record keeping policy in place. And record keeping is one of the big areas where people find themselves having enforcement actions or sanctions, because maybe you didn't actually break the law, but you don't have the proper records, and it seems administrative, but that is one of the issues where I've often seen companies have issues with the government.
Okay, thanks for that. And I don't know if you can give us an overview of the USMCA, and just not the specific in compliance, but an automobile. You mentioned automobile, and the new requirement that is labor regional. I don't know how to say it, but in general, what is gonna happen with the new USMCA? In fact, with the new businesses, I don't know, is it gonna be easier to the companies from Mexico to go to USA and vice versa?
In some cases, some parts of industry think that this is a boon for their business. Other industries find that there are more restrictions. So for example, textile industries, clothing, and that sort of retail clothing, they find the new USMCA regulations on origination to be more cumbersome, and then therefore either they're not going to rely on the tariff treatment, preferential treatment, or either they're going to have more work involved when trying to employ that. One thing to note is that the unlike NAFTA, which limited certification to the producer or exporter, under USMCA, the certification can be completed by an importer. So if you're just the importer of record, you can now certify instead of having to be the producer or the exporter. So that's some liberation under USMCA that we did not have under NAFTA.
Okay, but although the importer can certify the origin of a product, the importer has to be to make sure that the producer has everything to prove that the products are origin from that complies with the rules, no?
Absolutely. So the importer now has a responsibility to, in making the certification, the importer must be prepared to substantiate that claim, meaning they have to prove the products are covered by the products covered by the certification originate in the USMCA territory. And as I said, the origination, there's a new method of certifying origin, but origination means that the product was sourced or produced within the US, Mexico, and Canada. So you can have a part that was made from steel that was, steel that comes from the United States, but then produced, meaning it was produced into a part in Mexico. You just have to make sure that you're following the, that you understand the origination. As I said, make sure you have the records. And as the importer, if you're making that certification, you've done your due diligence to be able to prove that certification is correct.
Okay, then as I see it, that is important that the compliance officer makes sure it's part of the program of compliance, no? I mean, you have, the companies surely have some areas that are dedicated to change supply and logistics and everything. But you need someone that is out of those areas in order to see that with the compliance program, make sure that they are having those records,
right?
To be sure and don't break the law.
And the importer is going to want to make sure it has a relationship externally with its supplier so that it can ask the supplier and make sure it gets the records for, it has the proper production records, the BOM or the bill of materials, all of the purchase and payment records. The supplier should be able to provide those, and the importer can rely on them and maintain those records for inspection. And those records have to be kept for 5 years from the time of import.
In USA, it is just for 5 years, or because here in Mexico, we have to keep the information for 5 years in some cases, but as the fiscal or in the respect of taxes, we have to keep the information for 10 years, I mean 5 years more than and when it is about machines or I don't know, maquinaria, machines, it is for more years. I don't remember very well, but it's something like 50 years.
50?
Yeah, but for the máquinas, machines. Yes.
Oh, so I can double check that. I'm not aware of any record keeping requirement under USMCA that has a 50-year requirement. Again, this is new. I'm relatively new to the USMCA, and most of my clients haven't been importing, trying to use that yet, or exporting and trying to get the preferential treatment when they're exporting. But a 50-year requirement, just based on my general experience in trade controls, we don't have anything like that in the United States.
Okay. Well, next thing I want to talk about is the potential areas of enforcement in general. No? For example, I know it's been some changes about intellectual property. I don't know if you already know something that is being enforcement.
So I don't know of any current enforcement actions because, again, this is relative, USMCA is less than a year old, although it has been, each country agreed to implementation back in March of 2020, and the current US president started the negotiations back in 2017. Of course, with the USMCA just becoming effective this July 1st, that still makes it quite new. One of the big enforcement areas I would pay attention to would be the making sure that your origination or certifying the origination is accurate, and again, keeping those records. As far as intellectual property, I have not yet followed what those requirements are and whether they've changed much from NAFTA, but it's definitely worthwhile to review any changes. And there are lots of U.S. government resources provided for private industry, whether it's it's going to be U.S. focused, but there's still helpful information for any importers and exporters to look on the customs cbp.gov. They have a whole training section on the different changes from NAFTA to USMCA. And then that should give you a head start on what areas to focus on for enforcement.
Okay. Well, now I know there are some doubts talking about intellectual property. I don't know if you have some information about the new rules. For example, for individual copies or private copies from software. You know something you wanna mention?
On intellectual property, say that again, please.
Private copies of software, for example.
Oh, private copies of software versus public.
Related
Are you talking about open source?
Yeah.
Open source versus closed. I am still learning about USMCA, and my main focus has been on the hardware or commodities that would be crossing borders, not so much the intellectual property that would be intangible products. But the the whole reason the United States issued this was to be, even though it's a free trade agreement that's supposed to bolster more trade amongst the three countries, the United States government currently takes a more protectionist position. So I would imagine anything that's going to protect intellectual property rights is going to be a part of the USMCA, because we are operating under an administration that is protective of U.S. businesses and U.S. intellectual property interests. So I can get an answer. If anyone has a specific question, I can research that, reach out to a few agencies and people, but I do not have that exact information right now.
Don't worry. Now, related to what you do, that is your clients, when you are working in negotiations related to technology,
Mm-hmm.
how is it affecting, for example, the business of your clients? That as I understand, your clients are dedicated to technologies, no? Technology transactions. In some point, these transactions with the technology is going to be affected by the USMCA. I don't know if your clients used to sell software or services related to the technology. For example, what is the cloud, no? For example, the services in cloud, if you will give us something.
So that's a great question. And what I'm seeing mostly with my technology clients who provide software as a service, mostly there are some who still provide software that that is downloaded as opposed to access through the cloud. And then the clients I represent that consume those technology services, their main focus on from an international perspective right now is on the data privacy. So with USMCA being the new preferential tariff treatment, the bigger concern I've been addressing for my clients has been the data privacy with the EU highest court making a change to the Privacy Shield, which was an agreement some U.S. companies were operating under to transfer personal data out of the EU. So as far as the USMCA and my software and my technology services clients, that we haven't yet reached that bridge. This is why I was happy to have this discussion so that I could refresh myself on some of what is happening. But for my current clients, they're more focused on the data privacy aspects. And I'm sure there are some touch points with USMCA as far as data privacy, but their businesses haven't been directly impacted as of yet. One thing that I'm looking forward to seeing is more so on the side of the technology producers that have a manufactured product, hardware, those sorts of things, and whether they're going to leverage USMCA to increase their business in Mexico and Canada. Because again, the idea behind this has been for the United States to get rid of what the current administration thought was unfair trade agreement and replace it with something that will bolster the U.S. economy. And so I haven't had clients asking just yet whether it's a good move to expand their markets to U.S. to Mexico and Canada, but that's likely what I'm anticipating. And also clients looking to, if not sell, but to also procure more from Mexico, especially because in the U.S., companies view Mexico as a low-cost alternative supply base. So that's what I've been seeing and what I'm mostly anticipating as far as how USMCA will impact technology companies, especially the ones that I represent.
Okay, that sounds great. Oh, I can listen my voice. That's excellent, and I guess now you have the confidence to tell them that you have some lawyers in Mexico to
Absolutely,
make it happen.
Yes. No, that's a great point. I will definitely be promoting that because, as I said, U.S. companies do view Mexico as a good alternative when they're looking to source, especially when they're cost conscious. And so one of the things that's always a balance, because as I said, you need a proper program in place. If you're going to leverage this, you can't just start claiming something is, originates in the 3 countries if you haven't done your due diligence. But knowing that we have experts in Mexico who can assist with that, I will definitely promote it.
Excellent. Okay, Dorcia. Now we are going to the end of the talk. Maybe we are gonna have some minutes more for questions, but I would like you to give us the elements in some points very concrete, right? The elements of a good compliance program. Just if you wanna close with that,
Sure.
that would be cool.
So assuming a company already has been utilizing NAFTA for its exports and imports, it should already have a program in place. And what you will do is compare or review that NAFTA compliance program and determine what, if anything, you can continue to use to satisfy the USMCA's requirements, and then make any changes or improvements as necessary. So some of the product specific rules, that's where the changes are. So you may still be buying and selling the same product, but under USMCA, they'll have a treatment that's different than what was under NAFTA. So you'll have to make those modifications and to make sure that the products remain eligible. And if they aren't eligible, that means, unfortunately, you're not going to continue to get that treatment, but you have to make sure that you don't, that you make that eligibility determination early on so that you're not treating something as if it's still eligible when it's not, and then racking up penalties. Companies should also review their record-keeping systems to ensure that they're able to produce the origin-related records in case the customs authorities ask. One thing you want to make sure is that you can produce complete and accurate records and produce them quickly, because you don't want the government waiting for you. So looking at all of that's another part of a good compliance program, is the tools and systems you use. In the United States, I know that SAP is one of the big procurement and logistics tools that companies use, and they're usually pretty good about updating their systems when there are regulation changes, but you want to make sure that any sort of technology enablement continues to be applicable to the new regulations. And so, again, for each product, when you're claiming USMCA, you have to certify its origins and generate documents proving that it was originated in the US, Mexico, and Canada. So that includes the bill of materials with the corresponding tariff classification. So in the US, we have the harmonized tariff schedule, and it's a long number with subsections that really specifies exactly what a product is, and then that's going to be the tariff classification code is your sort of ticket to eligibility. You'll have to maintain the purchase and payment records for finished products and the rule of origin analysis. So again, you want to have the right processes in place and the right people in place to perform those compliance functions according to the process, and having a comprehensive training program for employees throughout the company so that it is not just a centralized function. You do want some centralization of who controls the process and maintaining record keeping, but again, because trade doesn't happen in just one part of a company, it happens through the purchasing departments and the sales departments and the business development and even engineering when they're designing new products and that sort of thing. You want to make sure that the process is relevant and reaches each of those departments.
Okay, cool. That's cool. I guess everything is clear. Now, I would like to give a check to see if there are any questions from the... Okay. I have one question.
Sure, and I might refer to my notes during some of the questions.
Let's see. Is a question from a lawyer that works with us. It's Eduardo Palafox. and he says, he writes, what are the key benefits a small and or medium-sized enterprise will have with, we just mentioned some benefits, no?
Oh, but read it again.
What he wants to know is what are the benefits for small and medium-sized enterprises that use the USMCA?
So the benefit, as I said, is being able to get the preferential treatment and not having to pay tariffs. So when you don't have to pay tariffs when you export your product, if you're in Mexico and you're exporting products to the U.S. or Canada with preferential treatment, that's a cost saving. So you can export more without having the additional cost of the imports, and then you're able to, hopefully that increases your revenue. So there, as I was alluding to earlier, there is a trade-off when you are leveraging the USMCA or TMEC, because you have to have a proper compliance program, and compliance is an investment. But the good thing is that if you invest in the compliance program and you do it right, you do get those cost savings of being able to send your products throughout North America at the preferential tariff, with the preferential tariff treatment. So it can be a hard sell for some smaller and medium-sized enterprises when they realize they have to create a compliance program, but with the help of a firm like Tavares and Tavares, they know that they can do that initial investment and then be able to avail themselves of the preferential treatment. So that's a good question. It's worthwhile to repeat.
Okay, then even though the enterprises are small, it is better to invest in a good compliance program instead of not doing it, right? Because it could be more expensive or inclusive. It could mean the close of the company if you get in a...
So if you're not in a position to invest in the compliance program, then you're not in a position to utilize the preferential tariff treatment, because remember, there are government penalties, and you could probably get penalties from the U.S. and Mexico and and Canada, depending on which countries are involved. And so if you don't spend that money, you don't make that investment up front, you open up your company to the liability of government enforcement actions, which sometimes you can get off with a warning, but if it shows that you were sort of disregarding the entire compliance aspect, you're most likely going to face heavy penalties. And it just, I think it's a cost-benefit analysis that doesn't make sense to forego the compliance part and just try to leverage the preferential treatment. If you can't afford the compliance part, don't try to use the preferential tariff treatment. That's my recommendation.
Totally agree with you. That's a good answer. Thank you. I guess Eduardo, it works for Eduardo. Let me see if there is another question. Here we have another one. What is your opinion on the support that will be given to small and large companies through TMEC? Saying it's something related,
support,
right?
Meaning government support, or what support?
Doesn't mention, but I guess government.
So I think it's a great idea. As I said, free trade, the idea is that it makes it easier for companies within the free trade agreement, those companies in those countries, it gives them more opportunities to buy and sell, which should make it more profitable for everyone. So I think if the governments are supporting those initiatives, especially for small businesses, that is an overall positive thing to be able to allow small businesses to participate in international trade. Because one of the reasons I started my practice was I thought, I had this international trade experience at a large company, and a lot of the supply chain for that large company or small companies, and they're sometimes hesitant to engage internationally because of all of the regulations, whether it was NAFTA back then, USMCA now, and then depending on the sorts of products, there are also international traffic in arms regulations in the United States and the Export Administration regulations, which are regulations that impact defense or arms companies specifically. And so there are a number of regulations, there are a number of hurdles, but with government support especially, as I said, the CBP has online resources for private industry, and those resources are free and available, and that should encourage smaller companies and support smaller companies. As I said, that support is helpful in bolstering the economy. Or I should say the economies of all three countries.
Okay, yeah. We have more questions. Please give me a minute.
So the uniform regulations, that's something that the U.S. has put together that's supposed to provide that sort of support or helpful guidance on complying with the USMCA. That's just one thing I wanted to note. And I am not sure, because I have not followed, if Canada has yet put together its uniform regulations. And I imagine Mexico, if it hasn't already, will soon have the uniform regulations to provide guidance to its country, to its company.
Yeah. Well, everything, we are making changes in our laws. Certainly in the next months, we're gonna have many changes so that make uniform the way we are gonna operate the USMCA. Right. We have one more questions. That if you, as you know, or I don't know if you already know this thing, the TMEC will combat the monopoly practices and corrupt in contractual businesses. That's the question.
So how will the TMEC or USMCA combat monopolies and
corrupt practices?
Corruption, is that what you said?
Corruption practices, yes.
Oh, that's a great question, and I'd be happy to get more information offline to the questioner. But I do know one of the criticisms the U.S. current administration had of NAFTA, and the impetus for this change to USMCA is that it was corruption, and it encouraged corruption, and it encouraged monopolies. There, as far as I can tell, and again, it's new, there aren't many big changes to the USMCA. So as far as monopolies, the bigger players are still going to have a lot of the same advantages because they do have the resources. But as far as corruption, I'd have to research more what those provisions of USMCA are. And I know from a U.S. perspective, we also have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, which is a whole body of regulations targeted at making sure that U.S. companies aren't paying foreign officials so that they get unfair treatment in the sale of their products. So I know that's a whole separate body, and I know that USMCA has touched on it somewhat, and I'd be happy to research that more and provide an answer offline.
Yeah, as I know, there are some other, I don't know how to mention, some figures that regulate the anti-corruption. For example, the embargoes or blacklists or those lists where are included those persons that are considered as terrorists, for example, or because I know USA has those lists, and I guess is independent from the USMCA. No, USMCA is gonna be for making business easier if
Right.
you comply with certain rules, but not I guess not as focused in the combat of anti-corruption, right?
So one thing to note, and as I said, I'd have to refer to my notes for some of this. So Chapter 27 of the USMCA specifically addresses anti-corruption compliance and enforcement. So this is a change from NAFTA. And as I said, one of the criticisms of NAFTA previously was that it encouraged corruption. And now we see in the USMCA, there is an explicit provision on anti-corruption compliance and, again, enforcement. So that's the aim is to prevent and combat bribery and corruption related to any matter covered under the USMCA.
Okay, then the answer will be we have to study the chapter 27, right?
Yes, but knowing that that provision is one of the changes from NAFTA, the question will be, what does that provision have teeth? And because it mentions enforcement, I will imagine that it does have teeth, meaning that if you do not comply with it, there can be severe penalties. And so that should be a good signal that corruption is not going to be tolerated under USMCA.
Okay. Cool.
It depends, as I said, I'll have to look more closely at Chapter 27 to see how is corruption defined, and then what the enforcement could be.
Okay. We have one more question, but I mean it's like something we already talked. More benefits for USA. This person is Rebecca Rodriguez. Es una compañera. It's a partner from our firm. And she asks if will be more benefits for USA, but I don't know. Or do you think the countries will have the same results from it?
So that's a great question, and I will be interested to see the statistics that come from sustained use of USMCA, like how what the dollars were from each country. And my guess is that, and I'm specifically thinking about that labor requirement for the Mexican labor force, the $16 per hour, that, in my opinion, could be a hindrance to Mexican industry, and I'm just thinking like from a more comprehensive aspect, that it could be a benefit to the Mexican labor force. So okay. I'm not sure who's going to be the ultimate winner. The point of free trade agreements is that all of the parties to the free trade agreement are supposed to have a net benefit, but will the U.S. end up coming out ahead more than Canada and Mexico? Possibly. Again, we have to put this in the context of who was the proponent of this change from NAFTA, and that was the current U.S. president and his ambitions for making sure that the U.S. has the most economic advantages as possible. But all three countries eventually agreed on this, and so my hope is that all three countries will see a benefit, and that it doesn't become a sort of an extraction of resources from any one country unfairly. But that's an excellent thought, and that's always the sort of policy background we should consider when we are looking at these regulations.
Maybe we can talk about that again in 6 years, no?
Right, because the first year that those numbers aren't going to be enough. Yeah, probably 6 years is a good idea.
Okay. I guess we don't have any more questions. Let me see. We don't have more questions. Dorcia, I don't know if you want to give any last message about this important topic we're talking about?
Sure.
Or anything you want to mention for
So
ending?
again, thank you so much for this opportunity. As I said, I did start my career in international trade, and I was working with defense regulations specifically, but I do try to keep an eye on this because I've always been passionate about international business, because I do think it is one of the tickets to making all countries better off if we have the opportunity to buy and sell internationally. So again, thank you for this opportunity. There are, the regulations, there are over, I think, how many chapters? At least 27, we know at least 27 chapters. So there are plenty of points to continue to study and continue to see how industry is responding, whether there will be early adopters who start to leverage USMCA right away when they're importing and exporting, or whether companies are going to be more hesitant because of the changes and considering what else is going on globally with the coronavirus, if they have the resources to dedicate to making this transition. So I'm interested to see how this plays out for the 3 countries, and especially in I think the auto industry is going to be the biggest affected, and considering the auto industry is changing in general based on changing consumer needs, there's a lot going on, and this is going to continue to develop. So I'll keep an eye out, and I'll definitely remember to recommend to any of my clients or potential clients that there's a firm in Mexico that can help them with their trade there.
Okay, thank you very much. The same from here to your office, your law office in New York, in Connecticut, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, and we are gonna be in touch. I hope it will repeat someday. Something that is important to you, that you consider is interesting, and make happen the business, right?
And again, I just want to shout out those resources if anyone is interested. Customs Border Protection Agency, that's cbp.gov. They have a whole resource center, so go there. And then also I want to, one of the companies I work with closely on trade compliance is Globalize. They're a consultant based in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, and they go to companies on site, help you with assessing your current program. As I said, if you've been exporting under NAFTA, you should have had a NAFTA program, and so assessing what can be used from that program to update for your USMCA. They're a great resource for that. Some other resources, the Society for International Affairs in the United States, they used to do live conferences, but now I would imagine most things are online. And so with most things being online, that's a great opportunity to leverage some free resources that previously may not have been available.
Okay, if you can share them with us, we can share it with our audience and our clients. So we thank you again, Dorcia, for your time. Eric isn't available right now, but as he told you, we are very thanked with you. I mean, this was wonderful, great talk, and maybe next time again we can give another one. Okay.
Well, thank you so
I'm
much
gonna
again.
say goodbye to the audience in Spanish. Okay.
Okay. Do you want me to stay on?
Yeah, please. Bueno, amigos, clientes, socios de negocios, muchas gracias por darnos su tiempo en esta charla que nos dio la abogada Dorcia relacionada con el Tratado de Libre Comercio con América, Canadá y Estados Unidos. Y pues quedamos atentos si tuvieran alguna duda o comentarios, con gusto las podemos atender en nuestra cuenta de correo servicio al cliente @tavares.com.mx. Como ya les decíamos al principio de la charla, en días próximos estaremos cargando este video en nuestras redes sociales con los subtítulos correspondientes y pues estén atentos porque tenemos un canal de YouTube donde estaremos subiendo todas estas comunicaciones y en días próximos tendremos algún otro invitado que también será como de lujo, ¿no? Entonces, muchas gracias de nuevo y creo que podemos dar por terminada la transmisión. Then we can end the transmission. Dorcia, thank you again. Hugs.
Thank you guys so
Take
much.
care.
And if you ever want to have a discussion on SaaS agreements and data privacy, that's what I've been most focused on. Are we still, it says live on Facebook?
Yeah, it's still live.
Oh, well.
It's still live. But we can be in touch. No, don't worry.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you, Dorcia. Bye-bye.
Bye.